To be with you all this wonderful event. I manage our relationships with our various organizational and individual members. So to many of whom are in the room and at the event this week, so to our current members, thank you. If you are not yet a member and you would like to learn more, please come find me at one of our networking opportunities. And if you think you might be a member but you're not entirely sure, you should also come find me and talk to me. But it is now my great pleasure to introduce our next panel, and I'd like to introduce Andrea Schneider, who is a professor of law and director of the Kuchen Program for Conflict Resolution at Cardozo Law School. So Andrea, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My job is to introduce the panel, and we're going to get started, and you guys can already see on your tables that we're going to have this as an interactive session. So we're looking forward to hearing from all of you as well. So like a true academic, we're going to be talking about something I think about a lot, but I've brought you people who are actually doing it. So to this is my left, you're right, right the other left. This is Lauren Friedman, a partner at King & Spalding, who's going to be talking about her experience in this area. To her left is Calvin Cresty, who's a senior partner at Critical Risk Team, which is a boutique risk advisory company. And then to my far left is Cynthia Alcon, who is a professor at Texas A&M, who has designed the first law school class we think of its kind on conflict management and hybrid warfare. So we're going to be hearing about all of those. And let me just give you an overview to what we're going to be doing today. So basically, this is what we're doing. We're going to talk about what is hybrid warfare. It's been interesting that some of you have already stopped me and said, like, I think this panel is going to be interesting, but first tell me what the heck you're talking about. I'm going to let Calvin take charge of that. We're going to run through a scenario, which is, again, as I've said, on your table, so everybody can think about what the lawyer should be doing. Lauren is going to be talking about what the lawyer role has been for her so far, and then use our scenario to think about what it could be in the future. You're going to hear from us a little bit more about conflict management, dispute prevention, and how we've been thinking about hybrid warfare in the last couple years. And then we're going to be talking about how to teach lawyers about this, because that at least is the hat for two of us in what we're dealing with in the next generation of really making sure that we are prepared to deal with the evolving landscape of what's happening in the world. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass this to Calvin, who's going to tell us a little bit about what hybrid warfare is.
Thanks very much. I have 4 minutes and 59 seconds to nail this very complex topic, so I'll try my best. First, I'll start by saying that my ADR conflict management background started in the context of war. Like the judge that won the award today, I started in the former Yugoslavia doing negotiations, mediations with prisoners of war, dead body exchanges, kidnappings, etc., during the former war in Yugoslavia. I took that and I carried on in my career, and now in the risk advisory business, moving from a former peacekeeping role years ago. And in 2019, I came across the case of Huawei, which is a huge economic tech firm dispute between China and Iran on one side, US, Canada on the other side. And our company got engaged in it to assist and support for the repatriation of 2 Canadians in a kidnapping case, as we called it, or the unlawful detention of 2 Canadians by China. In that particular case, it was that moment that I had the aha moment where I realized that in this global context of a polarized world, the disputes between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and Western democracies, that I realized there's a key element in this. 2 key elements. Number one, the application of effective ADR and conflict management. Number 2, the role of lawyers, which I see as the first responders in many of these cases, and we work many of these cases in terms of the national security, economic security arena. So I'll start by trying to define hybrid warfare. I made some notes just for expediency of time, otherwise I'll be like the piano player Oscar Peterson and improvise and go all over the place. And I want to, be concise. So it's the space between traditional war and peace, i.e. today's current environment. I wrote some notes here this morning. An organized state driven by a campaign of conflict and competition to either destroy or dominate a state below military conflict, but often using legal and illicit means to achieve a foreign state's objective. That includes political, economic, and security goals. So why are we discussing it? Well, first, it is a conflict. Number two, it's a conflict that touches everyone in this room. Your families, your children, your corporation, and your profession. And although it's not well known here, in Europe it has a greater sense of awareness due to recent history in terms of World War II, the proximity of Russia, and their exposure to these type of activities, which we say sometimes historically is just economic competition, but they clearly define as acts of war, economic war, national security, and other forms of war. It's in most of the headlines, and I encourage you after today to look at the next 2 or 3 days and look at the headlines, and you'll see that although the term may be new, the activities dominate the headlines, CNN, CBS, and everybody else. It's also used or framed as unrestricted warfare, which is the term, the policy and strategic language of China, gray zone conflict, and irregular warfare. So when we see these cases and these disputes, they don't come with national security labels on them. They start with legal friction. That friction and its genesis provide opportunities for lawyers to identify, prevent, de-escalate, mediate, and protect our democracies, economies, and communities. And that includes the clients that we're representing. I'm just going to go to slide, the last slide, and I'll let you take a look at that slide. And we often look at these threat activities in separate entities, either cyber, illicit finance, or whatever it is, but really the way that foreign threat actors use them against Western democracies and our economy and our national security is the combination. Many of these are interconnected. We like to frame things in isolation, separate boxes, but the realities are they are all interconnected. They're driven by geopolitics, state actors. I've stated who they are. And it's really important to look at them from a legal perspective and as practitioners, not in terms of incidents, but as campaigns in terms of dominating us. Lastly, I just introduced the concept of Trotsky, a political theorist, and leave you with this. If you're not interested in war, war is interested in you. And a lot of security entities are trying to bring that forward as a concept, whether it's NATO or others, and particularly in the economic sector. So I'll turn it over to Lauren to discuss some of the concepts relative to lawfare, which is one of the domains in that picture, and expand on some of those. Thanks.
Thanks, Calvin. So, I mean, looking at that last slide, it does feel like a little bit of a dangerous world, but I'm going to talk about just one example of lawfare that I've confronted in my practice. Lawfare is the use of legal means, so domestic regulations, domestic lawsuits, foreign lawsuits, to achieve some form of domination or power over your adversary. And the example I'm going to share comes out of a series of cases in which I've been representing U.S. technology companies that are fighting back against basically the Kremlin, so Russian oligarchs that have brought a series of lawsuits against technology companies to fight back against, the U.S. sanctions, EU sanctions that have been crippling their ability to communicate their propaganda to the outside world. So, as you all know, the U.S. and the EU have imposed many sanctions on the Russian government, first arising out of the annexation of the Crimea, and then later out of the invasion of Ukraine. And in 2022, when the situation really escalated, a lot of Western companies, I'm sure many folks in the room are from these companies, many companies left Russia altogether, and the technology companies terminated the online media accounts belonging to the individual Kremlin, the Russian oligarchs that were using that media to spread propaganda. In response to that situation, which really hit the Kremlin hard, they engaged in lawfare. So they brought a series of domestic lawsuits before the Russian courts based on reformulated Russian legislation that allowed them to force these companies into Russian courts without any opportunity to leave, and essentially said the termination of these user agreements, simple click agreements, was invalid, violated the law, and they required the companies to reinstate their online media accounts. And the penalty for failing to abide was serious. It was a significant financial penalty. It compounds daily. And we're at the point today where the value of just one judgment exceeds the entire world's gross domestic product. So this is a threat, obviously, to a company, but it became a really serious threat when the Kremlin started to take the Russian court judgments and enforce them in courts around the world. And one court in particular froze the assets of one of our clients, and at that point, it became clear that they would need to respond. So that's a little bit about the background. Now, the lawyer's role here and what we can do in this situation is we can use a lot of the tools we've been talking about in these conferences, so international arbitration, litigation, and use affirmative actions to basically reconstruct the narrative and make clear that what the Russian counterparties have done actually violates the law, violates their user agreements, so that you can delegitimize those Russian court judgments, so that when they're trying to enforce them in courts around the world, we can show up with an arbitral award, say, actually, this tribunal found that is an illegitimate award. We can rely on instruments like the New York Convention and the ICSID Convention that establish a hierarchy of those legal instruments and that require that the International Arbitration Award receive greater deference than a domestic court judgment. There's other instruments that could be employed, for example, bilateral investment treaties. There's no bilateral investment treaty signed between the US and Russia, but if there were, this is arguably a violation of various legal protections found in BITs, including it's a denial of justice, it's unfair and inequitable. So those are other instruments. Human rights courts have weighed in on this. The European Court for Human Rights has held that Russia has violated the convention, and that again delegitimizes the Russian court judgment. And then a company can engage with its own government to ask for additional sanctions or other sort of retaliation to basically push back, and the impact of all of this has been to force the counterparties to rethink their tactics, because they come in with power, but you can respond with even greater power. I think there was a slide on this, but the other thing to think about is media. I think that will come up in the hypo, so I won't spoil that now. And then the other thing to really think about while you're engaged in this sort of work is that you're really dealing with an atypical counterparty. So many unexpected tactics arise along the way. I had no plans to travel to Russia, but I cannot go to Russia. I would be subject to criminal liability for the work I have done. And so it's important in responding to think about those threats at the outset, make sure you're containing them so that fewer members of the team are exposed to the threats, your client's not exposed to the threats. But in some, I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop here. But there's just a comprehensive sort of toolkit of what you can use to respond to lawfare. It's coming back to unlawful conduct with lawful mechanisms, and just resetting the narrative and putting your client in a position where it is clear that they've been under threat, they're the rightful party. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia.
Yep.
Okay, so at this point, you're probably thinking, what are they talking about? So we're going to try and make it a little real and bring you another example that you get to play with. So you've got on your tables a handout which gives you the scenario. So I'm not going to read it to you because you all can read it yourselves, but I'm going to give you some of the highlights. So first of all, true story. This really happened. We've added a few bits and pieces, but this really happened to the Port of Houston. It happened back in 2021.
Pause for just one sec. If you do not have set at your table, I know it's passed out at the front tables, so just wave your hands or hop to one of the front tables that has a bunch of those.
Yeah.
And those of you in the middle tables, just pass it back.
Okay, so
Okay, thanks.
this actually happened to the Port of Houston in 2021.
Thank
So right now I want you to imagine your lucky days. You are now working for the Port of Houston, okay? It is the largest port in the United States in terms of tonnage of waterborne cargo, right? The 5th largest port overall. So this is a major port in case you weren't keeping up with the ports in the United States. Now you know. So you're very proud. You're working for the Port of Houston. And what you learn, one weekday morning, IT tells you that there's some unusual network activity. They're telling you it's not ransomware. As far as they can figure out, no files have been deleted. There have been no demands made. And then there's a call from a federal agency telling you, this is looking a lot like something called Volt Typhoon. And Volt Typhoon is a Chinese state-linked cyber attack. Volt Typhoon has been found to target critical infrastructure in the United States. Ports are critical infrastructure. And it is used as a positioning attack, so it means that they're setting themselves up to be able to do something later. So they're just positioning within a system, okay? So you are all of a sudden in all these emergency meetings, right? You've got the executives of the Port of Houston, you've got the IT folks, you've got the communications folks, you've got inside counsel, you've got outside counsel. And everyone is trying to figure out, what do we do now? Operations is a big port, 5th largest in the country, largest in terms of shipping, tonnage of waterborne shipping. They want to just keep working business as usual. They don't want any of this stopped because of something that might be going on or not going on. IT is in a different place, right? They're very concerned. They want to be cautious. They want to make sure that whatever it is absolutely stopped and there's no further damage. Public relations, right? This is a big major operation in terms of a port. They don't want all kinds of media reports coming out that they're not controlling. You've got the lawyers, both inside and outside counsel, thinking, what do we need to do now? What is our regulatory framework? Who are we obligated to report to? How are we going to report this? What does this look like? And when are we supposed to be doing the reporting? Are there legal privileges involved? Do we have something that we need to be thinking about so we're minimizing premature disclosures here, right? And then you're going to be thinking about beyond the first day, rumors are going to be flying. We all know, right? We're in an internet age. Word gets out, right? What about all the customers, all the shipping folks that use the Port of Houston to bring in whatever it is they're trying to bring in? What's going on with media, which Lauren alluded to? And what about the regulators? Okay, so that's your basic framework. This is the basic scenario. Spend a few minutes talking at your tables and thinking about what are the concerns that you have, understanding what you understand now. What advice do you have for the corporate counsel, both in-house and out? Who should be reporting to whom? And how are you going to decide all of these various questions? Have fun.
I like that guy. He's like, wow, this is complicated. What do we do? And I'm like, yeah. Great. Like it's good. Like people are. This is good. Okay. So at 46, I'm gonna tell them that they have 1 more minute. You're all doing amazing. We'll have lots of time to discuss. That'll be.
So we have 20 minutes left.
No, we have 40 minutes left. That's counting down. We're doing well. We moved. In 20 minutes, we introduced everyone. You guys did great. Great, great, great. So one more time for questions. You took 5, but you were right on it. No, no, I mean, and it's a great example. Like, love natural animals. And this will be,
Oh, let me take your back.
we're going to hear back. Seven-ish or whatever. Let them talk. And then we're going to talk about what we would think about it.
I was kind of happy that I.
This is great. Like, look at all right, the people in the room. This is great. Where's the Duchess? Nobody's on the phone. That is the 6. And all of a sudden, yeah. Great. So we provided good.
So much for them to-
Photos. This is good.
You need another? Sure.
Nobody's on the phone. All right. What do you think? We'll turn it. 1 minute, 1 minute, 2 minutes. 1 minute?
Wow, they've had enough time.
They've had enough time?
Yeah.
Yeah? Should I give them a 1 minute? No, they're still talking. All right, I'm giving you guys 1 more minute to come up with any advice, and then we'll get back together. you so much. Sin, after facilitating, I'm going to start with you kind of talking about like some of our advice. So we're going to hear from them. Then you're going to talk about slides 7 and 8. Yes? Or do you want to leave it up while we talk about
Yeah,
it?
I can
We'll
talk about,
7 and 8.
I can do 7, 8.
Right?
Yeah.
I'll do 9.
You'll do 9, yeah.
And then I'm going to pop it back. So you, me, and then you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, for other reflections. Everything? All right, then I'm going to flip it back to you before the discussion slide
To talk about the class.
to talk about the class. And then we'll leave time for questions because we have time and they'll have time. All right, let me get everybody back together so we can hear a little bit about your reflections, concerns, advice, thoughts. I'm going to pick on Andrew Edelman because I figured out your name and I loved your response, which the first thing was, wow, this is hard. And I'm like, that's exactly how I responded. Like Calvin calls me in 2019 about like, this is what's happening. I'm going like, wow, what? Well, look, never going to sleep, full sleep again when you start figuring this out. But I'm going to start with you and then would just love to hear from, we'll popcorn around and thank you for having the mic there. So go
Sure.
with it.
I'm from Houston. I'm honored this is about Houston.
There you go.
And I forgot to give a plug in my panel. We are starting, I'm the co-chair of our CPR Houston chapter that we're launching. If you're here from Houston, come find me. I'll tell you more about it. Right, or Texas, thank you.
Okay.
We talked about risk mapping. We have people, I'm part of our crisis management team at LYB. And we do drills on this type of thing. We have someone here who's worked on similar matters. We talked about risk mapping. We talked about identifying all the different parties that are involved and figuring out kind of priority of who to notify first. We talked about emphasis on the federal government being involved and being a high priority because of their involvement with national security. I don't know if anybody else in our group had anything else to add, but those were some of our thoughts.
Okay, great, thanks. Other groups? I think we have one right over, right here? Here. Oh, we've got 2 mics? Awesome, thank you.
So we collectively came up with the priority of stopping the infiltration, but we, Anne, I think that's your name, Anne said she's already got a system partially in place. So outside counsel is ready for the call. You're doing it under the supervision of counsel to preserve privilege where you can. The firm that will actually do the forensic analysis is already engaged, has been before this attack was identified. In addition, you're talking to corporate governance people and corporate governance counsel, and you're calling insurance counsel.
A lot of phone calls is what I hear you guys
You're
say.
assembling a team quickly. I think I've covered what our group said. Did I miss anything?
All right, thank you so much. Is there another table coming? Great.
Well, you guys had a lot of the same ideas we did, but we'll add on. One, we wanted to control the media as opposed to trying to shut down the media because it's just not going to happen. The other thing was that we wanted to isolate and cut off the intruder, and that would involve reauthorizing everybody because we're now suspecting an insider.
Oh, that's fun.
And so we're going to reauthorize everybody after revetting and reclearance before everybody can get in there. We also need to see if we have vulnerability for our IP and trade secret portions of any projects the port might have, and if so, isolate the Git repositories for those and take them out of the system. Basically, you're going to create a isolated box so that you don't have anybody who anybody, even your own people, can get into it until you have figured out what you are faced with. You can tell I do IT, right? And then I think that we also said that we needed to notify some key stakeholders, And if you're inside counsel, you need to hire outside counsel so that you have somebody to blame if things go awry. And if you're outside counsel, you want to bill a lot for an investigation. Those were our jokes, but
Right.
they're bad, sorry.
Sort of funny, sort of real.
But sort of real.
real.
The players list was important. I think they mentioned the cast
They
of
did.
characters. Who do we need to tell? Who do we need to not tell? And this is a public port, so maybe this is not applicable, but if it was a private company, I'd be worried about stock prices and regulating the impact on the market, as well as reputational risks. We also, and I think Microsoft has this already, but you should have in place already a security, safety, and crisis management plan so that you're not thinking about what you have to do for the first time when you actually have the crisis. One of the things I did when I was fortunate enough to be outside counsel to SFO, the San Francisco airport, was to work on their terrorist safety hijack plan. We're not going to wait till we have a hijack situation, and I will say they've never had a successful hijack in SFO ever.
So, great, thank you. I know there was.
So one of the things we talked about was making sure we establish an incident command structure. We need to know who's in charge, who's responsible for reaching out to what stakeholders on the outside. As was just mentioned, we presumably have an emergency response plan. We have folks who are trained in each of the disciplines here. It could be cybersecurity, it will be public safety that would need to be incorporated, could be the incident commander. We need to make sure our management team is apprised and engaged, and we want to make sure that we're controlling communications using our in-house legal as well as outside counsel, again, to make sure we've got good documentation of our steps, of our actions, so that in the end, when this is all over and we have to explain what we did and why we did it, we have a protected information.
Okay, all right, thanks. Maybe one more table if somebody wants to share. We've covered it. All right. Okay. Whoops,
No, there's one
sorry.
more. There's one
there
more.
was one more.
In the back over here, Andrea, yeah.
Go for it. Not anymore.
Well, just to keep it short, we viewed it as, and having been in these situations before, a couple of things that are important. Janice mentioned one. You don't want to be thinking about what you should do when a crisis comes. You want to have a plan in place. But the other thing is the competing functional interests. Crisis like this is an existential threat to the corporation. You got to weigh various interests. So establishing that crisis management team, I think you said the command structure was a lesson learned, and there needs to be one person who's taking all of that input in and making the decisions when those functional elements are in conflict. And without that, you compound the crisis by having a crisis in your decision making. And that was the consensus.
Yeah, I like that framing, the crisis within the crisis, to avoid that. All right, we're going to hear back to Cynthia about what actually happened. You should know we're going to come back and circle to the class that Cynthia taught at Texas A&M. You guys just took the final exam, so well done, right? All right, Cyn.
Yeah, so one thing that is important to point out, in the class I brought in the head of cybersecurity at the time, who was able to tell us firsthand, and he was our client, so the students got to interview him like they would a client about what had happened at the Port of Houston at that time. And one point that he made a number of times was the only reason that this attempted incursion was caught was because of the day of the week and the time of the day. If it had not been during a weekday when their IT department was fully staffed, they would not have known it happened because they would have gotten in and they would have been hidden, which is, we do not know exactly where Volt Typhoon sits. We know that there has been a lot of attacks, some have been put off. We know that there have been attacks in a lot of critical infrastructure in the United States. This one was caught by happenstance, right? And so this is one of the points, and as you all are talking about the planning in advance, and all, this is one of the key points, right? And one of the key takeaways was also about how is it being staffed on the weekends and off hours, right, moving forward, recognizing that the port, as with all critical infrastructure, and really just about everyone, is a potential target, right, and recognizing that that's a current reality. We can go to the next slide. So this is it, right? The reality here is that we're at the intersection of risk and geopolitics. So the Port of Houston, which actually is a private entity, I'm not sure if it's publicly held, but it is in fact a private port. So the business risks are a key thing that they were thinking about and they're worried about. But being a port, the oversight regulatory authority is the Coast Guard. And so there had to be reporting to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard has cyber response teams that it sends out when something like this happens, which of course tells us how common this is. They already have the structure in place to investigate this, right? And have had, right? This was back in 2021, it's not yesterday. And thinking about how do we plan and what is it that the Port of Houston needed to put in place to think beyond what were more common ways of thinking about things, right? Obviously, Houston hurricanes are an issue, right? Thinking about whatever the weather events might be, ransomware, something all IT people, of course, are thinking about, but recognizing that they were a target of the state of China. This was a different kind of attack than might have otherwise been lodged. And thinking about what does that mean also in terms of as you all have discussed, right, the media and the public face of this. If you Google it, don't do it right now because we're still talking and telling important stuff, but if you Google this, right, you will find there are actually quite a few articles on the Volt Typhoon attack against the Port of Houston. And the materials that my students were reading were all in public information, right? They got the additional insight of being able to interview the head of cybersecurity at the time, but almost everything they had was publicly available documentation about what had happened during this attack on the Port of Houston.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this panel basically to here, and it seemed like a logical overlap, was that in my attendance at CPR and over the years and working with CPR, we've really been talking about dispute prevention, conflict management writ large. And so as I kept on learning about different pieces of hybrid warfare, I'm like, oh, that's hostage negotiation theory now for cyber. Or, oh, that's team negotiation on how do we manage our team. Oh, that's a different incentive structure that we want to collaborate with the federal government. But the fact of the matter is, it's all of these theories all at once as you're trying to figure out sort of everything going on and to really have a broader perspective on how conflict management tools can help sort of prevent, and if not prevent, figure out so that that crisis of communication is, we're dealing with the crisis at hand as opposed to a crisis of leadership, a crisis of team management, a crisis of communication, a crisis of IT. And so one way that I think about it is, what are the tools that we have for sort of typical negotiation that we've all learned, and how do we bring in some of the crisis management tools to that? And that's sort of hostage negotiation theory, or even sort of prisoner's dilemma, the idea that it's one thing when it's ransomware and the criminal gang is going to go attack somebody else. It's another thing when it is the Chinese government who will be back tomorrow, right? And tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. And if they didn't get in today, they'll just keep trying, right? It's not going away. It's sort of an ongoing thing that we continually have to think about and be ready to respond to. And then there's the best practices in terms of managing your team, right? Sort of who's at the table with you. And that challenge of when you've got, if not in this instance, but when you have, for example, reporting, this CISO has to report to the SEC or now be jailed, well, they have a different incentive structure than the general counsel or outside counsel or the IT that's like, we're good, we're clear. And no, No, actually, right. So everybody sort of with a different incentive structure internally, and how are you creating that team management so that the incentives are aligned internally? And then, of course, behind the table, when you do have the federal government involved, you have regulatory oversight in one way or another. You have your customers or your stockholders or your board of directors who, again, have different incentives, different pain points and pressure points, as it were, and what are the tools that we have already developed in terms of dispute prevention to really think about those conversations and having those conversations in advance, again, to try to think about that. So I want to turn back to Calvin and Lauren to give us some reflections on this, and then we are going to leave a little bit of time for questions.
Thanks, Andrea. So I don't really think about this from the perspective of the company. I'm thinking about this from an international perspective, and I agreed with the suggestion that you need to make sure that the federal authorities are engaged here, because I don't think any one company is going to be able to respond to a Chinese-sponsored cyber attack alone. But I think you also have to coordinate with other governments, because, of course, a virus can spread easily cross-border. There's nothing necessarily there to contain it. So there does have to be very close collaboration between governments to make sure that it becomes contained if it is at a global level. And one thing that has happened in prior attacks of this nature is that there are these big questions about extraterritorial jurisdiction and which countries are entitled to step in to stop an attack of this nature. So, there's the Budapest Convention that basically says a government can step in to stop an attack, but there has to be some sort of a kinetic response or damage or a fatality that would justify that kind of action. And so what governments have done in the past is they've banded together and to stop this sort of a virus spreading throughout systems so that nobody can really point the finger at any one government and say, well, they did it. So it's very important to make sure that multiple stakeholders are at the table working together. And then I also think it's important to think about the international frameworks that we have in place and make sure that they're up to date. I think that the speed at which cyber threats are increasing is far outpacing the speed at which we're developing legal instruments to respond to that. And so it's something that I think collectively a lot of companies have to come together to think about and make sure that governments are really putting in place the proper protection, because I think many companies that are in this room have more information on how to respond to this than the government. So that's sort of broader scale reactions I would mention. Calvin?
I'll start with a couple considerations. I don't know everybody talked about, and I'm shifting the thinking from a domestic situation where we're looking at things in terms of how our government thinks. I spent 40 years countering foreign threat actors, starting in wars in different places. So I always, in terms of countering them, it's more important thinking about how they think than how we think. So the first one is when we talk about legal privilege, no foreign states respect legal privilege. So if you have your phones on in your room, if you have anything else, I worked in foreign operations myself. It's one quick email, one quick flick of a switch, and your phone's being monitored and accessed. So once you go into that legal privilege, it's good in terms of reputational damage of your company, but in terms of countering the foreign threat activities, in terms of this type of conflict, it only protects you from your allies and your friends, i.e. the government or your partners or your stakeholders or whatever else. It doesn't protect you from the foreign threat. So that's one, just to start thinking about it, or try to start thinking about it in terms of the larger conflict. Number two, somebody brought up about the importance, I think you did, ma'am, of the insider threat. And I would just say insider threats, not threat, because these organizations and these threat actors think like chess players, like 5, 6, 7 steps ahead in terms of when they're doing something, they're thinking of very intelligent-based campaigns. They are not just doing a cyber attack for money. Quite often, they're doing it for geopolitical interests. So they're collecting data, they're trying to disrupt, they're trying to distract, they're looking at possibly a merger acquisition as a result of the data that's getting, and it's a lot more complex than just, hey, here's an incident. So I think it's really important, although the framework, I think, of Western democracies, I'm probably more North American, and I'm Canadian, so I share, I see my country the same way, looking at critical incidents, crisis management versus conflict management. Conflict being the long game, crisis being the incident, and I think it's really important to look at it through the lens of conflict management, not crisis management, and looking at the long game that the adversaries may be playing. I'll introduce a famous American, Ronald Reagan, 9 most dangerous words that he's ever heard. I'm the government. We're here to help. And I worked with the government. I worked with the U.S. government, the Canadian government, NATO, Five Eyes, et cetera, et cetera. This issue and relying between corporations and government is not an effective strategy. Working more solidly with other corporations, civil society, is going to be a lot more resilient, stronger response than just your corporation, the government. And when I'm going to say something provocative, if you go to Eastern Europe, particularly the Baltics, their mindset's completely different than Western democracies here, i.e. North Americans. They don't look at it just as defensive. They look at what we can do offensively. And I mean offensively as civil society, as a group of businesses, because when you look at the historical play in terms of strategy, in terms of unrestricted warfare, which this is from a Chinese perspective, one of the most significant strategies they have in terms of conflict is divide and conquer, i.e. this company goes this way, this company goes this way, this company's going to cut a deal with somebody in Beijing, this one's defending against the cyber attack. And unless there's that consistent both strategic approach for defense and consideration for offense, as odd as that sounds, that's what they're doing in other countries. And when we're looking at it, just to give you an indication, when we're talking about different issues in terms of high school, if you go to Finland, like in grade 9 or 10, they are historically teaching misinformation, disinformation, fake news. When we're teaching here, my 19-year-old stepson, that isn't what they're teaching here in North America. So that mindset in terms of what we have to deal with this conflict, I think it's really important to kind of like shift the culture so we're not overly dependent on governments. We're thinking strategically in terms of not just defensive, which is the way that we're thinking often, but also consideration to being offensive in terms of a collective group, economically and national security in terms of what we're doing.
Sin, you want to talk about how you teach this?
Yes. So one of the things that I think any of us, once we start thinking about it, and I'm sure you're all thinking about it too, is a key piece of all of this is awareness, right? If people don't know this might be a problem, it changes how they're operating in the world. How are lawyers doing their jobs if they're just thinking about one little case and not thinking of it the way Calvin is describing it as these are larger problems, they're long-term, they're multifaceted, they're campaigns. It's not just a one-off, right? And that demands that lawyers behave differently. It also demands probably that we have a different environment in terms of the laws on the books, our regulatory environment, right, which is right now very backward-looking, not forward-looking, right? And also that's where we are now. So in terms of thinking about for students, we as a group have as a target to have both law students and business students be at the basic level aware that these issues and this very serious problem is out there, and to be thinking about what that might mean for them as professionals moving forward. So the first course that I taught on it, which is, Andrea said, we think is the first course that has been taught in a U.S. law school, was conflict management and hybrid warfare. And it was putting the frame of conflict management on this topic and thinking about how lawyers are acting and reacting in this environment and using the skills that we already know from conflict management and other types of disputes and conflicts. And most of what we talked about in the course was more about on this side, right? We're not talking about how we're resolving the bigger disputes that we have societally, nation state-wise, with China, with Russia, with whoever else it might be. But what does that mean for us on this side? How does a lawyer on this side manage the inevitable disputes within companies, with their clients, and between clients? And so the first course was really an overview course on what is hybrid warfare and talking about it in a variety of contexts. So talking about in the context of cybercrime and what that may ultimately be in terms of a form of hybrid warfare. Talking about in terms of election interference. Talking about in terms of misinformation, disinformation, and talking about the basics of conflict management as a tool. The course that I'm teaching this semester is even more fun because we are taking, and it's really building off of the last panel on energy security, and we are doing a course on energy security and hybrid warfare. And what's really interesting to me and exciting about that is I do think we could take any sector and do that sector and hybrid warfare. And it gives us an ability in this course that we're doing this semester to dive a little deeper and put a little bit more context around what we're talking about. So one of the challenges in this, which is probably a challenge a lot of you are feeling right now, is this is so big and it's hard to get your head around it, right? And so if you put it in a specific sector, which is what we're doing on the course right now in energy security, I think it helps us all to think a little bit more clearly. So what I would encourage is you all have your areas that you know lots about. Think about it in that context, right? And so the energy security and hybrid warfare class, it's one of our global programs classes at Texas A&M, which means that it's spread over 2 semesters and the summer, and we do a 2-week summer field component in these courses. So I've taken the hit for everyone, and we're going to go to Paris and Brussels on this course. It'll be a 2-week field trip with our students. And why did we pick that, right? I mean, of course, it's very nice to go to Paris, right?
You know,
But
everyone wants to take the class right
I know.
now. I'm just
now
saying.
you all want to be Texas A&M law students, don't you? So one of the reasons it made a lot of sense to be looking at that as a location is because of, as Calvin was talking about, right? What's going on in Europe right now? What's the awareness? What's the sensibilities? Certainly the conflict in Ukraine has made a lot of this very current and real, and certainly when we're talking about energy, right? It came up in the last panel, and it's coming up in the context of our class, right? What's going on in Ukraine and the Russian activities flowing from and around the Ukraine conflict, and that are very clearly acts of hybrid warfare, right? And so being able to have those discussions with our students, and they're going to be meeting with lawyers and folks that are working in a variety of international organizations, private firms, law firms, and companies, and energy sector specific folks that are working for different energy companies, and the EU, and we just confirmed we'll be meeting with Interpol. So it's going to be a very interesting class. So.
All right. Calvin, you had one more thing?
Yeah, I was just going to add, as Cynthia goes to Paris, I'm headed to the Arctic next week. And I just wanted to, you know, I want to provide some clarity that although we're talking to a collective group of legal minds and the legal profession, it's not just because it's another conference and here's, at least for myself, why we're talking here. It's because I truly believe in terms of what we're seeing, in terms of foreign threat activities in this larger global conflict, the key people in this, the peacekeepers in it, the people that are going to protect us are the lawyers. And strategically, you know, when I reached out during the Huawei case, I reached out to Andrea and a larger network, and I said, we need to do something in the world of conflict management. And when the 2 sectors that we need to connect with are the legal profession and the C-suites, because what I'm seeing in all the boardrooms and all the law offices, that's the first place where there's an opportunity to deal with this in terms of this global conflict. And it's the first, probably the people that we need for legal privilege and a lot of other reasons. But it's really there where I'm seeing the aha moments where we're going, what is really going on here? And so I just wanted to say that not going around different conversations with different professions saying you guys are really important. I truly believe as a practitioner, the most important profession is the legal profession in this particular context.
All right. Good. Well, we have a few minutes for any questions or commentary from, well, any of you. And you can we're available for questions, since we have a little bit of time. Elena? Yeah.
What about insurance coverage? If there is an insurance policy in place, there is a duty to notify the insurer, and you're risking croaking your coverage if you don't tell them about it.
Yeah, insurance is huge, and it's also a challenge with our language, isn't it? Because war is an exception to most insurance policies, and if we're talking about this as warfare, that creates a whole raft of other challenges when we're thinking about insurance companies, doesn't it? So it's a huge other area, absolutely. So I don't know if others have thoughts.
We're currently dealing with a case, and sadly, the case involves me, for a
Yeah.
2.5 or $2.3 billion lawsuit against different entities in Canada, including myself. And our company is attacked in the lawsuit, and we have insurance. But it was really interesting because we thought, hey, an act of war, not an act of war, but it was something our insurance company, and they've asked me to go to Lloyd's in London to have a conversation with them possibly in the next year, just to have a conversation about, because they're looking at the weaponization of the law in terms of part of warfare, something that they haven't wrapped their heads around in terms of insurance policies and that. So it's really, when we started talking about this with our insurance and with the legal counsel representing the insurance, they were all somewhat kind of in shock, on their heels, trying to sort it all out. But it's still kind of trying to unravel and figure out how does insurance work in this space, particularly in lawfare in terms of the weaponization of the law. And I think everybody's playing catch up in terms of world events.
I mean, and to be clear, it's a libel suit, which we've seen libel suits used to shut people down, and we understand the law is different in the UK, the US, Canada. What happens when the libel suit is funded by a foreign government? Although you can't quite prove that, right? And again, how do you get the government involved and the insurance company and, right? The sort of the ratcheting up of a tool that we've seen before, but now it's being used differently.
And I would just add in that one I think started with a cyber attack relative to the forest industry, to an espionage case, to a criminal case, to a government versus financial institution case, to the weaponization of the law in a lawfare case. So when we talk about the different types of law, which was framed, we have this type of law, this type of law, this type of law. What we're seeing with the threat actors, like they cross all boundaries, and they're looking at the weaponization of wherever there's a vulnerability to attack through legal means.
There was
Other question? All the way in the back.
Yeah, it's a very short question, but probably not a short answer, which is we heard a lot about AI, like everybody does nowadays everywhere. To what extent could you use AI to solve such a crisis? For example, it was mentioned that you need staff to detect this intrusion, which I thought was incredible. So it's a general question. Thank you.
So there's a group out of Washington, D.C. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. You people may know it better than I do, but it's QTEL, which is a venture capitalist national security entity attached to the CIA and the NSA, and they create very, very good machine learning AI capabilities. And some of those, like, for example, our company is using that are specialized in terms of identifying corporate relationships, director relationships, and I think, we've used historically LexisNexis, but I think in the new world, looking at some of these other ones, there are ones out there currently that specialize, in terms of if, like, we do a lot of work for private equity firms to go, hey, know your client, who are you dealing with? It looks like a proxy of XYZ, but then you go 3 companies behind and you go, hey, there's Russian ownership there, there's Chinese ownership there, there's Iranian. So I think using very applicable AI programs in addition to, you know, LexisNexis and other ones is really important, I think, in 2026.
All right. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Thank you, thank you. All right.
Well, thank you all. Let's give actually Andrea a wonderful hand for her moderation as well. We've got 1 minute to get up and stretch before we turn our attention to our keynote speakers. So feel free to, don't leave the room, just get up and do a little bending. And then in the meantime, if I can ask Jeff Kachavin to come and introduce our keynote speaker.